Wigwusin, Natawamag Nitampag. Good day, family and friends. Neesu, Wushuwunoag, Director General, the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas. I hope that this video finds you all safe and healthy, given everything that's going on. A lot of stuff happening in society, and interesting, just, paying attention to how things are going and at the potential of what things could be. Haven't been on in a while. As usual, usually only come on when there's something pertinent or that we feel is necessary to be said. Other than that, feel like there's been some good information that's been put out there to pretty much get anyone who's earnestly seeking on the right track in terms of identifying who they are and understanding how the law applies to your status or standing as an American Indian. And that's really the subject of this afternoon's video, the American Indian. We did a video a while back on the difference between American Indians and Moors, just kind of laying out why it's incorrect to call all American Indians Moors. We're not saying that there aren't some tribes that had relationships with Moors or individuals that might have American Indian and Moorish heritage. Everyone's story is their own story. But it's incorrect to say that all Indians are Moors. And from time to time, we see messages from different people kind of arguing from what it seems to be a general misunderstanding of what an American Indian is. So today we're just going to go ahead and break down what the American Indian is and the different classifications of it and how they tie in, or how the status is substantiated. And it looks like there's about 5, maybe 6, depending upon how you look at one of them. I'm going to lump them together as one. So I'm going to say 5 statuses of American Indian as we understand it at the time being. So let's get into it. First of all, just a little understanding of what the American Indian is. Just in short term language, it's an Aboriginal inhabitant of the Americas at the time of discovery by Columbus. And I'll put definitions down in the comment section so you can see the Ballentine versus the Black's Law. But that's generally what an American Indian was understood to be, and is understood to be now, when the term became adopted into law and popularized and all that good stuff. So it's a generic term, and it just means anyone that's an Aboriginal inhabitant of the Americas at the time that Columbus discovered. But it's also tribally based, and that's how they knew people were Indians. They didn't bring them here. They didn't come here. They were here, and if you were here, you were operating in some sort of tribal fashion based upon family heritage or, proximity to living to each other. So those are the main things. Generic term, Aboriginal inhabitant of the Americas, and it's tribally based. Secondly, at the time of the US Constitution, Indians were not considered citizens. They were outside the body politic of the US, and did not become citizens until the Snyder Act of 1924 officially. However, this was conferred upon them. It wasn't something that individual tribes were asking for collectively. So what it did actually with the Snyder Act of 1924 is to give Indians a dual citizenship status under US law. One as a US citizen, the other as a tribal citizen of their particular nation. Now, the issue that a lot of Indians have, probably why you've been watching these videos, probably why you're interested in knowing more about who you are, is that most Indians are not operating in any dual citizenship capacity. They're just a US citizen. And why is that? Well, because their tribe doesn't exist commercially. And this is all commercial. All of these laws, all of it, when you break it all down, it's commercial because it's about land rights. It's about what someone can or can't do to you and what the penalty will be. But when you're talking over here, it's primarily based in commercial law. So when they say that your tribe doesn't exist, they don't mean that you're not in the flesh and blood here. It means that commercially the people that you're saying you're related to don't exist. And that's why you have to be specific about which particular people you're related to, and which why claiming to be just a generic American Indian isn't going to really be legitimate. You need to know who you are. So quickly want to look at just some of the statuses of what tribes can be, and then this will all relate to the status of an American Indian. So a tribe can be in the commercial capacity of non-existent. That means, you know, you and your family, you know who you are, but that's it. You know who you are. You're just a U.S. citizen. There's no commercial or lawful basis by which you exist anywhere else that says that you are who you are in a separate jurisdiction from the U.S. So you're an American Indian, and that's what happens when we get into the status for the first few. But your tribe's non-existent. Secondly, your tribe can be a domestic corporation, and there are tribes out there that have gone the 501c3 route and things of that nature. But when you do that, your tribe is then subject to all U.S. laws. So that's state and federal. So you're not going to have any treaty rights that you're going to be exercising if you're a domestic corporation. You'll exist, but it'll be in a, just like any other U.S. company. You just be U.S. citizens with a U.S. company. Then there are tribes that are operating through a recognition relationship with the U.S., be that state or federal. And with those tribes, there's going to be a number of criteria that they're going to be looking for, much of which FANA has built its criteria based upon with an addition. But this isn't specific to anyone. These are just the general things that they're going to be looking for. Aboriginal and historical ties to specific ancestral territories. So when you're talking about tribes, they're usually looking for the specific place where the tribe is from and an historical tie to that place. So you didn't move off and go somewhere else and then you found out who you are and now you're pointing back to where you're from. They want to see that you maintain relationships with there. So you're specific to there. You're not just this generic Indian sort of thing. You're specific to here. These are who your particular people are. Aboriginal and historic ties to specific ancestral lands. Then they're going to be looking at your tribal body. Is it primarily of direct blood descendants of the people you're claiming to be? So they don't want to see that your chief is, but then everyone else is a bunch of Indians, generic Indians. That's not. Is it your family? And that's why you've always heard FANA push family, family. You need to know who your family is. You need to know what your family history is. You need to know what your narrative is. Because that other criteria is going to be your tribal body being primarily those people. Not you and your family and then everyone else. You're all primarily those people when you go back and find out what your narrative or your experience is. And then they're going to look at, have you maintained a documented presence in your area? And this is where the importance of genealogy and things of that nature comes in. Doing research, finding documents, finding records, finding, you know, all of the different things that people who are engaged with the system create in order to function in the system. Remember, all Indians are U.S. citizens at this point. All Indians are U.S. citizens. But they enjoy a dual citizenship if they understand the laws correctly. So a maintained and documented presence in those specific territories that you're saying you're from. And once again, not that you're from there a while ago, hundreds of years ago, but that you've maintained some sort of presence or relationship with that, and that it's documented. And everything's documented. Everything, because it's all commercial, so they document everything. If they were going to take something from you, they're going to have a paper trail to show that they took it from you, because they want to be able to go and do whatever they're going to do with it after. And it's all about paper and records and all that. So maintain a documented presence. Then they're going to be looking for you to have a functioning tribal governance. So how long have your chief been your chief? How long have you all been organized? How, you know, all of those things are going to come into place. And for a lot of communities out there and tribes out there, you're going to have people who, they've been doing this since the 1700s, 1800s, 1600s in some places, definitely 1900s. So they're looking at that as well. And, you know, That's why we encourage going and finding and building relationships with tribes that are there, because they're going to have a much stronger claim than you do if they've had a functioning tribal governance for a while, in whatever structure that is. Most of the FANA nations, all of them, operate under traditional forms, with clans and tribes and things of that nature. So, but a functioning tribal governance, and then this is always key: acknowledgement from other tribes. And you know, yeah, if you're in an area, even if we're not even talking about federal and state recognition, we're talking about being in an area, being around other tribes. And I know up here in the New England areas, there's a lot of tribes who just aren't federally recognized or aren't state recognized. But the other tribes around know that they're tribes. Regardless of what their relationship is with the system, the other tribes around know that they're tribes. So if you're in an area and no other tribes know your tribe, you've never been to any of their functions, they've never been to any of yours, you've never engaged in any culture, you just pop up out of nowhere, you're going to be in a bit of a pickle, because there's tribes around. You might just not have heard of them, but there's tribes around. And if you understand the community, and if you understand the relationships and how traditional Indians engage with each other, it's not hard to find them. Someone will point you in the direction of them. So acknowledgement from other tribes. And then there's another element that FANA adds on as well, which I'm not going to really get into here, but those are 5. Aboriginal historical ties to specific ancestral lands, tribal body of direct blood descendants, a maintained and documented presence, a functioning tribal governance, and then acknowledgement from other tribes that are around in your areas. If you don't have them, your tribe's going to really be not looked at as legitimate, I would say. It might be considered a band if you got a bunch of different Indians together from different places. They have intertribal councils and things of that nature. A lot of times in urban areas, it might be looked at as a group, you know, and that's cool. All of these things are cool, because especially if you're looking to have a community and to be engaged in the culture or learn from other cultures or share cultures, all of that's beautiful. We're talking specifically from a tribal perspective, though. So you have those things that go on, but they're not necessarily going to meet the standard of a tribe. And when we are talking about the American Indian, this is why it's important to understand that there are different statuses and standings under this title of American Indian based upon the breakdown of tribes I just gave you. So because there's tribes in different statuses, you're going to have American Indians that are in different statuses. And you need to understand what your status is if you are indeed an American Indian, and most particularly if you're planning to claim to be an American Indian. And most certainly you want to stay away from it if you haven't substantiated that you are actually from a tribe that's based in what I just shared with you. Now, let's turn our attention in the remainder of our time here from the understanding of the tribe to the American Indian. Remember, generic term, it's an Aboriginal inhabitant of the Americas, and it's tribal based, and I just broke down what tribes are. At the time of the U.S. Constitution, Indians were not citizens, but under the Snyder Act, they became citizens. It was conferred upon them, but they maintained a dual citizenship status. And the issue with a lot of American Indians out there is that they can't exercise their dual citizen status because their tribe doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, it exists, well, yeah, their tribe doesn't exist, or it's particularly existing in a domestic status. So turning back over to this American Indian, the first status you're going to have, and I think that this is where a lot of people are at, is the misclassified American Indian. These are the ones who, you know, have been able to document that their people were American Indians that were reclassified over to Negro, reclassified over to white, reclassified over to African American, colored, whatever the case may be. They're able to show that they were American Indians and that they were misclassified. Now, this is why it's important. You have to be able to find the American Indian side of things, because there were also African slaves, East Asian slaves, Atlantic Creoles, and Moors that were also reclassified to Negro. So it's not just this thing that if you have Negro on a document, you're automatically an Indian. It means you got lumped in, you got misclassified, and now you need to find out who you actually are. So you have that first status of misclassified American Indians, And because they're misclassified, they're most certainly not associated with any particular tribe. So their status is just a U.S. citizen. And we all know this. This is where everyone talks about the term black and I'm a copper colored. And that's why even the copper colored, because you're still misclassified. You're still just a U.S. citizen. Even if you are a copper colored Aborigine, an autochthonous, you're just a U.S. citizen. That's what your status is, because there's no relationship with anything else other than the U.S. And your status is just your classification in the U.S. And all American Indians are U.S. citizens. So even if you are a copper-colored Aborigine, you're still a U.S. citizen, just like a black person, an African American, a Latino. You're going to be like them. And this also goes for our rural and urban Indians. Now, what's interesting about the rural and urban, and I'm lumping them all into one, they could be two separate categories, because rural areas are much different than urban areas. But I'm saying rural or urban, they could be tribal citizens. Now, they could, that means they could be associated. A lot of individuals, you know, you run into people who say, well, you know, I know that my family was Cherokee. Or I know that my family was Lenape. I know that my family was whatever your family might potentially be. They may be living in urban areas or rural areas, but not associated with any tribe. In which case, they're going to be like our misclassified or U.S. citizens. They're going to be American Indians. But they're going to be U.S. citizens. Just like our misclassified, they're going to be U.S. citizens. They're going to be American Indians, but they're going to be U.S. citizens. And they don't have any dual status because they just know their heritage. But the point being is, in order to even make that claim on any of them, you have to know what your blood heritage is. And that's where the American Indian status comes from, your blood heritage. Now, rural and urban Indians also may have connections to their tribe, but they're not living on the reservation. They're off the reservation, so they're going to be considered rural or urban. So in this case, they're going to be both statuses, whether you do have the connection with the tribe or don't have the connection with the tribe. You're a non-reservation Indian. So you're just a U.S. citizen. Because if you're not on a reservation, but you're a U.S. citizen, then you're under U.S. law. If you're not on a reservation and you're a U.S. citizen. And remember, all Indians are U.S. citizens, regardless. So now, let's move on to this next status. This next status is going to be state recognized. And once again, this is tribal based. However, the status of tribe, being that it's in the recognized category, is going to be that of a domestic dependent nation of the U.S. So that means that they are, you know, have the history. They meet all of the criteria that are there. They're probably also acknowledged in treaties and things of that nature. A lot of state recognized tribes are the tribes that are acknowledged in treaties and things of that nature. And it's going to be by blood heritage once again. You're from those people that signed those treaties, that were in these lands, that are documented in these lands as being these people, and this is your chief, and you know, all of that's going to be going on. But they're going to be domestic dependents, and they're going to be in the status of reservation Indians. So when they're off reservation, they're under U.S. law and all that good stuff. But when they're on reservation, they're under whatever agreement they have with the state that they're in. And most of these are going to be pre-U.S. because the U.S. at a point when it started designated all of that to Congress. So once the U.S. starts, that's where you're going to have a lot of the federal tribes definitely. But before the U.S. starts, it's primarily going to be the tribes that have that colonial era heritage acknowledged in treaties. However, if they are state recognized, then they're going to be having a dual citizenship status, but it's going to be a recognized status, which means on the reservation, they have their rights. Off the reservation, they're subject to the laws as they pertain to the state that they're in. So that's a state recognition. And usually they're treated by law, I think, as a county. I think they're considered counties under U.S. law of the state. Counties of the state, if they're state recognized. And remember, U.S. citizen tied to treaty rights and all of those criteria. And it's by blood heritage. And these are reservation Indians. Next, you have your federally recognized Indians. And the same sort of thing, but their relationship is coming with the feds, with the U.S. government. They may have access to treaty rights, but then they also agreed to a recognition relationship with the U.S. Or they could be under the BIA sort of relationship where you just have it with the BIA on behalf of the U.S. That's going to be based on blood heritage as well. They may have access to treaty rights, and they are going to be the dual citizen, but only on the reservation, and then once again subject to whatever those federal relationships are while they're on the reservation, so whatever the jurisdiction is there. And once again, they're going to be considered domestic dependent nations. Those are going to be domestic dependent nations. They're underneath the U.S. They're like state recognized, so they're underneath the U.S. They're political entities within the U.S., but they're under U.S. jurisdiction. Those first four right there, misclassified, rural, state recognized, and federal recognized, are all going to be subject to U.S. law. All of them. Misclassified, rural, urban, so if you're copper-colored Aborigine, if you're autochthonous, if you're American Indian, if you're American Aborigine, whatever one you are, if you're not associated with the tribe, then you're under U.S. law. And if you are associated with the tribe, but it's state or federal recognized, you're under U.S. law. So you're all under U.S. law in these first four categories. And in the last two, you may have different rights when you're on the reservation, or different rights in the particular state based upon the relationship that your people have. But that only comes through the status and relationship that your people, the tribe, have. Those are the four: misclassified, rural and urban, state recognized, federally recognized. And now we're going to move on to our fifth one. And this is what we did videos on this before, but we just want to clarify once again. Under this status of American Indian is the status of Indian not taxed. And this is the only status that really is operating properly, from our understanding, in the dual citizenship status. What an Indian is not taxed is once again, it's tribal based through blood heritage. So if you are not in relationships with the tribe, if you're not under any sort of formal governance, then you're not an Indian not taxed. And this comes right out of the 1860 Census Instructions, which said that Indians not taxed are not to be enumerated. Indians that had renounced tribal rule. So as soon as you're not under a tribe, you've renounced tribal rule. Were under state or territorial law and exercise rights of citizens under state or territorial law were considered assimilated and were to be enumerated. They were enumerated because they had assimilated. So if you don't have ties to a tribe, if you haven't done your blood heritage, you're an assimilated American Indian and you've been enumerated. You're part of the U.S. So there's no exercising any rights associated with an Indian not taxed. So if that's the Indians who are to be enumerated, then the ones that are not to be enumerated, the Indians not taxed, and this is by the 1860 Census Directions, are within tribal rule and not exercising rights of citizenships or territories under those laws. So if you have a birth certificate, if you have driver's license, anything that citizens have the rights to do, not benefits or entitlements, but rights to do, voting. If you're doing any of these things, if you have any of these things, you are a citizen, U.S. citizen. The Indian not taxed is going to exist in a space outside of that, solely outside of that, originated in that space. But you can only do that when you can show that that status existed before the U.S. got here, before the state got here, before the colony got here. If you can't show that, then you can't prove that you're an Indian, and you most certainly can't prove that you're an Indian not taxed. You can't prove that you're an Indian if the blood's not there, if the genealogy's not there. If your narrative specifically and personally is not there, then you're not an Indian not taxed. And there's nothing wrong with not being, not an American Indian. And there's nothing wrong with not being an American Indian. What's your heritage? What is your experience? What is your relationship with here? But if you're going to be an Indian, you have to be an Indian. You have to have the blood. You have to tie back to the tribe. And you can't be just a U.S. citizen claiming to be an American Indian, talking about exercising rules, rights, anything outside of U.S. law. You don't have it. Any of that comes, once again, from the relationship that the tribe has with the U.S. And for an Indian not tax status, that status of the 5 that I identified here, and it could be more, the 5 that I identified here, 4 of them are directly under U.S. law. Directly under U.S. law. You could be a super full-blood Indian, and you're still under U.S. law. It's all about your tribe's relationship with the U.S. And what the FANA member nations have is relationships that predate the U.S. and that were sovereign to sovereign with colonial powers. So because the tribe is tied to sovereign colonial powers, and because the blood members are descendant from those people who were involved in that, then there's rights now to say that our tribes exist outside of the U.S. We were here before the U.S. We are those very people that you're speaking about when you talk about those tribes. That's us. You're talking about us. So that gives the tribal citizens of the FANA member nations a different status of American Indian. It's nothing to do with them as individuals. It's about their relationship with their tribe and who they collectively are comprised to be. So when I say I'm the Meshipog from Pumham Sachem of the Meshipog Nahiganset tribe, it's because my bloodlines are in the Meshipog territory for forever. My uncle was a chief up there. His father, my 4th great-grandfather, was a chief. So it's all his grandfathers were chiefs. So it's all going back, continuing the same form of tribal governance that has been going on in these specific lands, documented in the records that we are those people, acknowledged by the tribes that are around us that we are those people. Regardless of the infighting that goes on, regardless, we are those people. That's where the Indian not tax status comes from. It's nothing to do with me as an individual. It's the fact that I'm a part of this tribe. And this tribe has not agreed to any recognition relationship, any domestic form of existence, but does exist commercially in an international space. That's what gives to me an Indian not tax status. That's what gives to any of the other FANA member nations an Indian not tax status, their relationship with their tribe. So it's all good. It's so wonderful that everyone's getting into their heritage and into their culture. Those are basic things that everyone should be doing anyway. We should all know who our people are and where they come from. It's a colonized outcome that most of us don't know that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't. That doesn't mean it's not what is expected and considered the norm. It just means that we've been deprived of that general right to know who you are. So it's so wonderful that people are getting into that. But what we don't want anyone doing is, as you come into this knowledge, to move as if you have a full understanding if you don't. And we're seeing a lot of it with this American Indian term. You're not an Indian not taxed unless you're in some sort of relationship with a tribe. You're not a federally recognized or state recognized if you're not in some sort of relationship with the tribe. It's tribal based. And if you are but are living off a reservation, then you're most likely, unless you're an Indian not taxed, you're going to be under U.S. law. And if you don't have any relationship, just the heritage, then you're most certainly under U.S. law, regardless of what you call yourself. It's not about what you call yourself. It's about what your ties are to your particular tribe and what that tribe's relationship is with the U.S. And that's why we say there's no sense in going and starting new tribes. You're going to miss out on a lot of those elements that we mentioned, and you're not going to be considered legitimate. And then you're going to be saying that you don't have to do things under U.S. law, and you do, and you're going to get yourself in trouble. You're going to get yourself in trouble. That's how you end up on black identity extremist lists, sovereign lists, all of that. You're going to get yourself in trouble if you are not paying attention and understanding the different statuses, their relationship with the U.S. law, and what your particular claim is. And it's all particular and personal. There are no we claims. There are no generic us copper colored, us black folk, us. There is no us. Who are you? And who are you and your people? And potentially, maybe, if you know your lines and I know my lines, we see that they meet up somewhere. So then maybe we're the same. But that's specific to us. We ain't all the same because we have the same skin tone, hair texture, physical attributes. That does not mean that we're the same people. It means right now, I guess you could say that we're having a similar experience in a nation that judges people based off of that. But colorism is a form of racism, and racism is just a tool of colonization, and we're supposed to be decolonizing. These generic groupings together are forms of colonization, and we're supposed to be decolonizing. So as you move into this space, as you learn more about the American Indian status, as you go into your heritage, don't just stop willy-nilly playing around with laws. Understand, if we're decolonizing, it means we're going back to how things were before colonization started. And in these lands, I won't talk about anyone else's lands, in these lands, there was tribes, there was chiefdoms, there was all of these different things that were hierarchical structures based upon people's heritage and who they were related to and all of that stuff. So if we're decolonizing, pay attention and understand and make sure that you're applying it appropriately. So that's just that, the different statuses of American Indian. You got your misclassified, your rural/urban, your state, your federal, and then your Indian not taxed. These are going to be based specifically on your relationship with your tribe and its relationship with the now U.S. And remember, American Indian is just a generic term. It's just a generic term. Your specific type of American Indian is what's going to inform you of what your relationship is with the U.S. and what rights you have under the law. So hope that's helpful. Hope that's informative. And hoping everyone is just staying safe during everything that what's going on. We always like to say, I attach to all the warriors that are out there. You know, stand up for what's right. It's always the right time to do the right thing. Don't ever think that you need to wait to do the right thing. And may Creator continue to watch over and guide us all through these very tumultuous times. Akwani, Natawama Kanitampag. Peace be unto you, family and friends. Peace Kanash. I hope to see you all soon. I hope.